Hey everyone, this is Casey Meehan from the Sustainability Institute, and we're just going to wait a couple more minutes. We're waiting for a few more people to join. I see Daryl's with us. Raz, how you doing? I see you. Jen S is here. We'll wait just a couple more minutes. Hi, Jamie. Welcome to the chat. We will get started in just a couple minutes. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Casey Meehan. I am one of the leaders of Sustainability Institute, and welcome to our Sustainability Chats virtual tour series for August, where we are having Cooley Region Ecoscapes show us around the food forest. So just to do a couple of things before we get launched on the tour. A couple of housekeeping things. You started in with your video and microphones muted. We're doing that just to save bandwidth, so we can, first of all, it's avoids interruptions, but it also just saves bandwidth, so we can make sure that we have the clearest, smoothest presentation for you. So if you could keep that off, that would be great. If you need to communicate with us, you can do so in the chat section. So from your Zoom app, if you look, thinking it's probably near the bottom, there should be a chat session, in which case you can feel free to click that, and then that message will go to Carrie Thompson or me. And you can see Carrie, I think, just put in a little welcome everyone. Have a question, just type it here, so that should pop up. Now, before we get going, we also have a quick poll we want to have you take, just to get a sense of whether or not, how much you know about food forests and permaculture. So you'll see a poll that just popped up. The responses are anonymous. So if you could answer those two questions, please. We'll give you 30 seconds or so. Okay, so great. It looks like everyone has voted. So Judson, what we just asked, I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but one question was, how familiar are you with the concept of permaculture? And we have about, let's see, 50% of our attendees right now are familiar. So on a scale of 1 to 5, they have a 3. One's extremely familiar, and a couple are not all too familiar at all. So we really run the range here. And then which areas are you most excited to learn about? Check all that apply. People are, most responses are people are looking at the foods being grown. They really want to learn more about the foods being grown there and how the food forest has benefited the community. People are also interested in just the process of how the food forest was built, and about Cooley Region ecoscapes in general. So that's where we're at. Now, I want to just in way of introduction, I moved to the La Crosse area. My family and I moved about 6 years ago. And almost immediately, I started hearing about Cooley Region ecoscapes. That name was just sort of out there. And I think I heard Judson and some of the others involved in Cooley Region ecoscapes speak at a local conference. I think it was the mayor's convention. And there's some ramblings at that point about this food forest. And really, I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't really know much about permaculture or food forests. And now here we go, you can fast forward 6 years later and you look at the corner of West and Main in La Crosse, right on the corner of the YMCA there. And what was once a vacant plot of lawn is now a really highly productive and ecologically healthy space for people to grow community and to grow food. Now, in full disclosure, I'm part of a decision-making team that helps make some of the decisions for the food forest. And I got involved in that work because I think it's a really great example of what's called multi-solving. So multi-solving are these projects that help us solve multiple pressing problems in our community all at once. So if we think about the food forest, it grows food that people can harvest for free. It provides habitat for pollinators in an urban setting, which is pretty unusual. It manages the excess stormwater that then helps protect our marsh and our rivers. It creates a community. It promotes health and wellness. So it does all of these things in this tiny little corner of the city. And so I am super thrilled to have Judson Steinbeck, one of the owners of Cooley Region Ecoscapes, who, again, their name is just all over La Crosse because they do such incredible work. I'm honored to have Judson here and giving us a tour of the food forest. He is just a wealth of knowledge. I have learned so much about what it means to actually rethink and reimagine landscaping in an urban setting. So Judson, I'll let you take it away. For those of you that haven't attended one of our sessions before, we typically do about a half-hour tour. So Judson's going to show us around the food forest. And then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So as you have questions, feel free to type them into that chat, and we will take those questions and ask them of Judson near the end of the tour. So with that, Judson, take it away.
Unmute. Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you see me, Casey?
Yep, you're all good.
Okay, great. So, there we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. My head grew about 3 times the size of what it was originally, thanks to your introduction. And I'm delighted to be able to be here to share with you all about the community food forest at the YMCA. Right now I am standing just about at the corner of West and Main at the northern edge of the food forest in the shade of a couple plum trees. And I'm going to swap the camera around and begin the tour. Constructed as kind of entryway welcomes. Is there a problem with my microphone, Casey?
Hi, Judson, this is Carrie. Yeah, we're having a little bit of a problem. There we go.
Am I coming through okay?
You are now. We lost you for a little bit there. It was a little bit choppy. So I think things look okay right now.
Oh, okay. Okay, sounds good, thanks. Anyhow, so these arbors were constructed from locally harvested willows. We don't rip them out of the ground. We just cut them so that they grow back and they can to the food forest. So this space right here shows an alternative kind of lawn area. Predominantly what you have here is sedge, which is kind of like a grass. It's very hardy. It never needs to be watered or mowed, and only very infrequently weeded. And it's an example of what you can do with a lawn space that you don't want to mow and spray and irrigate. And then interplanted in this space are some pear trees, and all of the pears have already been harvested from these pear trees here. And then a serviceberry or Juneberry tree, which already fruited and has already been picked out by both people and birds alike. Here we have some stone benches that we created as kind of seating space. And then this patio here, this is kind of a cool story of repurposing materials and ecological building practices. So you see this new sidewalk, which was poured during the installation of this food forest space. And this patio here was the old sidewalk. We had saved a bunch of the old sidewalk and chiseled the concrete pieces to look like stone and constructed this gathering patio space where when we used to have group nights where we would work and learn and harvest, this would be our sort of gathering yoga music space for those group volunteer nights. And then it's framed again by more pear trees, again, which have been picked clean by folks coming to harvest, as well as this additional little sedge lawn. Over here, we started a little blueberry patch, and there are also some kind of woodland growing here and there throughout the space. And this space here, we have some currants, we have apple trees, more serviceberry trees, and a really extensive mint patch. I like to call this the mojito garden, but of course mint can be used for other things as well. And mint happens to be a phenomenal pollinator too. Most of the blooms are done, but you can see there's, boy, I'm looking at least 10 different species of bees that have come to pollinate here. A little side fact, there are around 400 species of native bees in Wisconsin, all of which provide important pollination function, not just the bumblebee. 90% of those 400 species live underground. The other 10% live in little, different kinds of little colony spaces. More apple trees. Here we have another currant shrub. In this space, we have some annual plants, some tomatoes, some kale, some broccoli, eggplant, some different things like that. And this originally was designed to be taken care of by the teen moms that have a group here with the teen center. This year, the maintenance has been a little bit different because of the situation with COVID, but historically this space has been taken care of by a group of teen moms that are part of the Food Forest volunteer group. This right here, this giant shrub is a hazelnut shrub. By the way, if any of you are interested in, native plants, edible plants, shrub options that could substitute for your traditional like spirea, viburnum, hazelnuts are phenomenal, and then you get to have hazelnuts. Here we have a bunch of native plants and some native berry bushes. This is called aronia. You'll actually see these in the co-op in juice form because they're quite high in a bunch of different nutrients. Another and they're just so incredibly popular. And you'll see there are barely any raspberries on them because they just get picked clean. I was mentioning to the hosts of this program this morning that we do have a staff person who comes weekly to do maintenance here. Here's a few berries that haven't been picked clean yet. And part of her responsibility is to harvest any food that hasn't been picked and might go to waste. And there is nothing. The community is just coming and harvesting food. Here we have, as part of the food forest, a herbal, medicinal type garden. We have rose hips here, wild roses. And you can see all the rose hips, which are really high in vitamin C and make a really nice tea. And we have echinacea, which is a common kind of cold remedy. And we have oregano and thyme, both of which are have antifungal and antimicrobial capabilities, as well as simply just taste good. And then we continue on through the garden, and we have some elderberries. And the elderberries are ready to be harvested, and they are abundant. So if that is something you're interested in harvesting, come on down. We have tons and tons of elderberries ready to be picked. Along the bottom here, we planted it in over probably around 400 or 500 native plants, all of which provide pollination, as well as hosts for a variety of beneficial insects. Here we have a wild onion patch, and those flowers are still going strong. And you can see the elderberry shrub, which is just loaded. Here, a lot of milkweed has just come into the garden sort of naturally. Of course, the host plant for the monarch butterfly. Another currant shrub, elderberries galore. You can see all those deep purple fruits. All throughout the food forest, we have things like strawberries mixed in, just sort of and here we have tart cherries, more tart cherries, plums. And that's a very, very quick sort of overview of the plant species that we have here in the food forest. And so I do want to take a minute to discuss the process behind why we chose these spaces, the design process, and how this all functions. So the first thing, and perhaps the most important piece of this space, was that it served as kind of inspiration, as a model for others. And so the design layout is such that there are little patches of areas that one could then take and replicate at home. So if you wanted to have a sedge lawn at your house because you're sick of mowing your lawn and irrigating it and treating it with herbicides, well, you can see how to do that here. If you wanted to have a combination of apple trees with shrubs and flowers that grew as kind of companion plants underneath, you could copy that. If you wanted to do a concrete style, old concrete, what we call urbanite patio, you could copy that here and do it. If you wanted to create a kind of prairie berm at the bottom of your yard to capture water, you could copy that here and do it. So that was the idea behind this space, is that it was designed in patches or sections that could be easily copied, so that one didn't feel that they had to have an entire food forest in their backyard if that felt overwhelming. The second and really important, perhaps the most important part of this design, was how it is that we captured water on the site. So in a traditional kind of landscape, normally what folks do, or at least historically, is there's the building, wherever that is, and then you take and you slope the dirt away from the building so that it runs towards the sidewalk or the street, and then you lay sod or grass or perhaps a little garden around the edge of the building. And most of the water then drains away from the foundation, which is good. We don't want to have water sitting by the foundation of a building. And it drains away from there, and it goes right into the street or into the storm drain system or across the sidewalk, and eventually into the watershed drainage. In this case, the Mississippi River, where we live. Now, in urban settings, the number one source of pollution is stormwater runoff. So a lot of times the rainwater itself starts out polluted, as in the form of acid rain, picking up toxins in the atmosphere. It rains, and then it hits a variety of surfaces. It hits the roof, and it might pick up metals or paint or junk on the roof. It hits the streets or the sidewalk, and it might pick up paint or oils or different contaminants. And then untreated, it goes into the storm drain and goes right to the river. Now, what we did here and what we do with almost all of our designs with our work is to create a series of berms and swales. So a berm is simply just a bump, an elevated spot in the landscape. And a swale is simply a depression or a low spot in the landscape. And we created this entire site so that it would hold all of the water that hits it in anything up to a 6-inch rain event. And that way, first of all, we're infiltrating water on site so that we have less watering to do. And frankly, we haven't watered here for years because of this design, and also because of the way that the root systems interact in the soil, which is a later part of this discussion. And so basically at the top section, or the highest elevation of this garden, there are these bumps or berms, and we planted into those. And then as you move down, there's a small pathway. That pathway is kind of a depression. And so there's a first place for the water to stop, hold, and then infiltrate. Then we have a second bump, and we planted that with deep-rooted and also shallow-rooted plants. So then the water will infiltrate there, any surplus overflow. And then there's a third little pathway slash swale depression for more water to hold and infiltrate. And at the very end of this is the magic of that prairie berm. So you'll see there's about a 300-foot long prairie grass and flower berm at the very end. Now these prairie plants, their root systems will go up to 14 feet into the ground, which is really impressive. And so they will hold an incredible amount of water, and also, by the way, an incredible amount of carbon too. I have seen, although I can't confirm this for sure, but I've read different studies suggesting that prairie grasses and flowers are capable of storing as much carbon as a tropical rainforest because of how deeply rooted their root systems are. And in addition, we have a kind of a bump, a final berm to catch any excess water that makes it all the way to the end of this food forest garden. And I can tell you that we have never seen, under any rain event circumstances, the water overflow from this space over this final retaining wall. I'm going to give you a view from the bottom. So you can see we have this natural stone wall and then this final prairie berm to capture all the storm water that hits this site. The last thing I'll say about the storm water, this is where the magic happens. We have calculated this bill upon the initial installation with literally thousands of pounds of beneficial microorganisms. Those microorganisms feed off of these plants. I'm not a botanist, so I don't understand all of the complex interactions. But essentially what happens is that the microorganisms, as they feed off of the plant roots, they help to filter toxins out of the water. So sometimes we call systems like these bioinfiltration systems, because they're literally, rather biofiltration systems, because they're literally filtering out.
Thank you everyone for your patience. It appears that we may have lost Judson and lost his connection. We're going to try to see if we can get him back here shortly and potentially just do some Q&A.
Are you with me?
I think we just lost you, Judson. Maybe we can find a safe place where we can ask some questions and you can talk a little bit more about how the food forest has benefited the community, where our food sources from this location impact those. That would be great.
Yeah, sure. Am I good? Do you have any idea when you lost me?
When you went down below the stone wall and began walking there.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. I was just rambling about the interactions of microorganisms with the plant roots and
Yes.
how that cleans out water. But that's enough. So yeah, I'd love to answer some questions.
Okay, I think we'll get you in a safe spot here. The first one that people had some questions about was a lot of the food here is harvested. Where does that food go? Is that being used for programs? Is that just solely for community use? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I will first of all say that this is a year like no other, which I'm sure is not news to anyone. In the past, we've had quite extensive programming in the food forest. And so lots of the food was used for programming. We would make currant lemonade for the group volunteer times. We would have classes on elderberry syrup making and canning and all kinds of things like that. And also, historically, we would have some surplus produce that was then donated to like the Salvation Army or Wafer. And then in addition to that, people just come and they just take things, which is the idea. That's not a bad thing for people to just come and harvest stuff. People would work out and they would come and pick raspberries after their workout, or you would see some people would come here with little grocery bags and they would just harvest food and then go home on their bikes, or a variety of things. But this year, we haven't had really any programming other than these kind of Zoom lectures. And folks are just coming to the food forest and harvesting food and taking it home or eating it right on site. And that is, from our perspective, great. This should be considered a community resource. Now, what actually is happening with that food, I mean, we don't exactly know, other than people are coming, harvesting it, and then taking it home. I know, at least through some saying elderberry syrup or things like that, but at this point we don't have a great way of tracking how that's going down. But we all see it as wonderful that the food is all being harvested and that really nothing is being left as surplus.
Judson, have you seen any of the food forest idea spreading, whether it's to other parts of the city, you know, by landlords, by developers, by the city, or just by residents?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. So the first big developer to get on board behind this idea was 360 Real Estate, and all of their buildings. This style of landscaping is now part of their PR / who we are kind of business vision. And so they did a really extensive building downtown called the Hub on 6th Street, although the west side of it is on 4th Street, the east side of it is on 6th Street. And there's literally a food forest there. There's hazelnut shrub rows there. There's service berries, wild nodding onion planted. There's rain gardens. And then there's also like a giant prairie garden on the west side of the building that has literally thousands of native grasses and wildflowers. It looks awesome right now. It's a little bit past its peak right now, but it looks just spectacular as you drive southbound on 4th Street towards like Festival Foods. You'll see it on your right. Drive northbound on 4th Street. You'll see it on your right. Also, Roush Rentals, which is owned by Nick Roush, who also is co-owner of the Root Down Yoga. He has adopted a lot of these practices into his new buildings and new landscapes. And in fact, one of the buildings that he put up, Waterview 1 down by Goose Island, that won an award for stormwater management practices and its use of native and edible plants. Misty's Dance Unlimited is another building that we did in Onalaska that also won awards for stormwater management practices. And there's huge raspberry patches and other kinds of edible and native plants there. And then as far as on the residential side, you know, you drive around this town, there's a lot more fruit trees in yards than there were 10 years ago, like a lot. And you even see occasionally people putting in whole food forests into their properties. So the answer to your question is yes.
Great. And here's a question from a participant. How long did it, it's a sort of two questions here. How long did it take to create the food forest at the Y? And then a separate question is, what combination of plants could be planted on the side or center areas of roads?
Oh, sure. So to address the first one, that's a little bit of a complicated question because it was almost 2 years of planning and meetings and convincing people that this was actually a good thing to do, and fundraising. I mean, this was the first one in this town, and frankly, not a lot of other cities had them either. And not all the cities that had them had done them successfully. So it was years of planning, but the execution itself was really just a couple of months to have it completely finished. That's finished, you know, concrete walkways, patio areas, stone benches, grading, planting, etc. This installation was done, probably about 20% of it was done with help from volunteers, and 80% of it was done by our company. And then in terms of planting roadways, so I think that question came from Roz. Hi, Roz, by the way. It's nice to connect with you this way. So there's an incredible example in Illinois of what can be done with roadways, and a huge stretch, I think like a 200-mile or 100-mile stretch of roadway on I-55 is all native prairie, median. The whole entire middle of the highway is just a native prairie. I think Illinois is ahead of us in terms of prairie grass restoration and sort of the ability to maintain that. They're a little bit ahead of us in terms of relative to the state of Wisconsin. But I think that you have to be careful with like in the middle of a highway planting food, not so much because of contamination from the roadway, but you have to think about harvesting. Do you really want people crossing into the middle of a road to go harvest food? There are some safety considerations to think about there. I am less concerned about contamination. It's not that there isn't contamination coming from roadways, but it's more that, you know, it's likely that if you have food planted near a roadway, the contamination coming from conventionally grown agricultural products is far higher than what you might do along the side of a road if you're maintaining it using more sustainable practices. I don't mean to minimize the fact that there might be some contaminants coming off the roadway, but it's just probably not as significant as what we conventionally spray our more commonly grown crops with. But I think there are safety considerations. So I think that like medians and things like that, I really like to see more just an attempt to put native plants into those spaces rather than food. And, you know, I'll take 1 second to address native plants. So native plants is kind of a buzzword right now, and it's important, I think, to understand why. And probably many of you already do. But for those who don't, plants are important, not just because of the sort of simple ecological function that they might provide in terms of respiration, carbon sinks. Those are super important. But probably even more important than that is that native plants have, for thousands and thousands of years, developed co-evolutionary relationships with other organisms that depend on them for their survival. So right now I'm sitting by a serviceberry tree, right here. So this serviceberry tree, over the past thousands and thousands of years, has developed co-evolutionary relationships with about 117 different species of caterpillar, all of which almost exclusively rely on serviceberry for their survival. So that goes, you lose 117 species of caterpillars. Right next to that is an elderberry bush. I'm not sure if the sun glare is blocking it. So, but elderberry also has developed co-evolutionary relationships with caterpillar species that exclusively rely on it. And without those, the elderberry bushes, those caterpillars wouldn't exist. We most commonly know about milkweed. We have quite a bit of it in here because milkweed and monarchs have developed this coevolutionary relationship as well. But every single native plant has coevolutionary relationships which are critical to the survival of hundreds of organisms that may exclusively rely on that plant. Like oak trees, for example, there are over 500 caterpillar species that exclusively rely on oaks. So that's what I have to say about native plants.
Well, and if you think about it, that's, I mean, it doesn't just extend to, yes, the caterpillars, but then also, you know, if we branch that out to the birds, right? There are certain birds that need those particular caterpillars to feed their young.
Yeah. So there's an entomologist based in the East Coast, and he has done a lot of this research, and he found that a simple little vireo family, which is a kind of bird, in one day, they fed their babies, their little vireo babies, 72 different species of caterpillars in a day. Now that's not organisms, that's species. And of course, all the warblers that come here from Central America or the Caribbean or wherever during the summertime to migrate, a lot of them feed exclusively on caterpillars. And that's part of the reason that they come here, is because there's so much food available to them. Chickadees feed their babies exclusively on caterpillars and when they're born. And those are just a few minor examples. I mean, we're talking, these native plants really do support the base of the food chain. And if you planted something, say like a ginkgo tree, which is really pretty, by the way, and has a lot of benefits, that ginkgo tree being non-native, or say like a Japanese tree lilac, also super pretty and has benefits. A ginkgo and a Japanese tree lilac provide zero insects with a place to live, and therefore they're not, sometimes we say they're like plastic plants. That's a gross overstatement. They still are providing ecological function and value and beauty, but they are not really contributing ecologically.
All right, Judson, are you still with us? You're frozen up on mine. Oh,
Did you lose me?
Oh, yeah, just for a second. Okay, we have time for one more question that it's a question that I would love you to, again, we've got about 1 minute or so, so it's going to be sort of a quick one.
All right.
I've heard you talk a lot about, is you thought when you were starting to build the food forest, you were building a food forest, right? Building basically like an urban garden.
Yep.
But it turned out that you were really building community. I think that's such a poetic thing to say. Could you explain what you mean by that in like a minute or so?
Yeah, sure. So I have to give credit where credit's due. That quote came from Bill Soper, who's the executive director of the YMCA. And that was what he said. He said, you know, we thought we were building a garden, but we actually built a community. When you see the number of people here, the diversity of kinds of people that come here, and the space that this creates to play music, to harvest food, to do physical activity, to have a variety of ages, to have families, single people, old people, young people. I mean, it's just amazing to see this, the kind of community space that this has created. And perhaps that has something to do with the kind of plant community here that is also interconnected and interdependent and sharing resources. Or maybe that's just me being a sap, I don't know. But it's truly remarkable what's happened here over the past 5 years.
That's awesome. Well, Judson, thank you so much for the tour and for answering our questions and bearing with the technology issues. It was great. So at this point, we're going to mute your camera, and for other participants on the line, a short survey is going to come through. You're going to get a poll launched here in just a sec. So as we're saying again, goodbye and thank you so much to Judson. Couple of questions are going to come through.
I lost you, Casey. Are you with me?
Yep, I'm still with you. Carrie,
Okay.
are you there to launch that poll?
I am, but unfortunately it is erroring out. So it is not letting me launch that right now.
Okay. Why don't we move on then to just that final slide if you've got it. And I want to, again, just thank everyone. Thank Judson for his time. Thank all of you who participated. Thank you for your attention. Hope you got some ideas about the food forest and what it could do, what the potential is, not only for the communities you live in, but even for your own home. We have a couple of sustainability chats coming up next. Our next one, September 3rd, and that is looking at urban agriculture on city lots. So a little bit like the food forest, but really focused on residential areas. And that's going to be with Katie and Willie Bittner, who you may know through formerly of WISCOR, but they're also Great Lakes Trail Builders. And then we have another sustainability chat coming up. Either we think it's going to be late September, however, we don't have the date nailed down yet. And that's with Go Macro, which is a nutrition bar company in Viola, Wisconsin, who do very interesting sustainability work, both operationally and with their product. So you can register for the September 3rd sustainability chat with Urban Agriculture. Go to our website, sustaininstitute.com, and you can register for that. The Go Macro virtual tour for later in September, we don't have the date yet, so you can't quite register, but you should be able to within a week. So again, thank you everyone for joining us and bearing with the technology issues. And we hope to see you again in September for another one of our sustainability chats. Please feel free to spread the word and have a great rest of your August.